Two racist police officers brazenly stopped and mocked a black man driving an old Jeep, trying to assert their authority, completely unaware that he was their new chief. When the truth came to light, their faces turned pale. This is a story about abuse of power, justice, and how a courageous leader dared to challenge and transform an entire system. Marcus Johnson was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, yet his eyes always reflected firmness and determination. He had once been an outstanding police officer, respected by many and a role model within the force. However, after nearly 2 decades of service, Marcus made the difficult decision to leave, not because he no longer loved the profession, but because what he had witnessed broke his heart. The city where Marcus worked was one where police officers did not always adhere to the rules. Corruption had seeped into the decisions of those in power. As an officer with a strong sense of duty and integrity, Marcus could no longer bear it. He had seen too many of his colleagues misuse their authority to intimidate, abuse, and discriminate against innocent people. One of the most painful reasons for Marcus's resignation was the heartbreaking story of his younger sister, Lisa. Lisa, also a police officer, faced discrimination within her workplace. She was ostracized by her colleagues and denied promotions simply because of her race and gender. When Marcus learned about this, he did everything in his power to protect his sister. But in the end, he had to witness his helplessness against the blind protection and cover-ups of the leadership. Having endured these injustices, Marcus left the force and began a new chapter of his life. He moved to the suburbs, seeking a peaceful life with his family. Yet, even though he left law enforcement behind, Marcus could never fully move on. The sense of failure, the feeling that he hadn't done enough to change the system, haunted him. 5 years passed, and one day, while Marcus was working as a manager at a private company, he received an unexpected call from the city. It was news of a major shakeup within the police department. "You have been appointed as the city's chief of police." For the first time in years, Marcus felt an indescribable emotion. He couldn't believe that he was being called back to lead the very force he had walked away from. This was an opportunity he couldn't ignore, a chance to fulfill the mission that had burned in his heart all those years, to reform and rebuild trust in the police force. Although he felt a twinge of anxiety about the new challenge, Marcus knew this was more than a personal opportunity. It was a chance to change an entire system, to bring justice to people like his sister and those abandoned by the very institution meant to protect them. He decided to accept the position and return, not just for the job but for the community and his loved ones who had been treated unfairly. Marcus understood that this new role would bring not only professional challenges but also resistance from within the police force. Change is never easy, and there would certainly be those who didn't want it to happen. But Marcus couldn't turn back now. He knew all too well that if no one acted, nothing would ever change. Reform had to come from within. For Marcus, his mission wasn't just about solving problems within the department. It was a fight against everything he had witnessed during his time as a police officer. His goal wasn't only to reform justice but also to restore trust and respect in the profession he had once served with all his heart. With determination and vision, Marcus stepped into a battle he knew wouldn't be easy. But he wasn't afraid. He had seen enough injustice to understand that there was only one path forward: to fight. While Marcus prepared for the challenging journey ahead as chief of police, elsewhere in the city, 2 young officers, Mike Roberts and Jack Miller, were busy basking in their self-satisfaction during a routine patrol. They weren't officers dedicated to justice or community protection. For them, the badge was merely a tool to flaunt authority and dominance. Mike, the older of the two, had nearly a decade in the force. He was tall, with a condescending tone and a perpetually mocking smile. Despite his years of service, Mike wasn't interested in promotions or additional responsibilities. What he enjoyed most was the sense of control he wielded, especially when dealing with those he deemed weaker than himself. Jack, younger and less experienced, idolized Mike. Working with Mike made Jack feel powerful, and he eagerly followed his colleagues' lead in all his antics. Together, they frequently abused their authority, stopping citizens without cause, questioning them unnecessarily, and occasionally issuing threats just to stroke their egos. In their patrol area, Mike and Jack were notorious for their arrogance. Complaints from residents were not uncommon, but thanks to their connections within the department, they had never faced serious consequences. Public grievances were often dismissed or buried under falsified reports. One quiet evening, as Mike and Jack patrolled the suburban outskirts of the city, boredom weighed heavily on them. This part of the city, which they called the dead zone, had no real crime, no significant incidents, and rarely any emergency calls. For dedicated officers, a shift like this might signify peace in the city. But for Mike and Jack, it was intolerable monotony. "There's nothing to do out here," Jack complained, tapping the dashboard lightly with his foot. "How many times have we driven through this area without finding anything?" Mike glanced at Jack and laughed. "You've got to know how to make your fun, Jack. We don't need to wait for something to happen, we make it happen." As soon as he said this, they spotted an old, beat-up Jeep cruising slowly down the road ahead. The car's paint was peeling, and its body was dented in several places. The driver, from a distance, appeared to be a middle-aged man who didn't seem to belong to the area. To Mike and Jack, this was the perfect target to break the monotony. "Look at that," Mike said, pointing at the Jeep with an eager grin. "Looks like we've found some excitement for the night." Jack chuckled, leaning forward to get a better view. "That car looks like it just rolled out of a junkyard. And the driver, he doesn't live around here. Probably lost." Mike nodded, his grin widening. "Well then, we must help him find his way back to wherever he belongs, right? All in the name of public safety." Mike turned on the patrol lights and swerved the car in front of the Jeep, forcing it to brake abruptly. Tires screeched as the Jeep came to a sudden halt, narrowly avoiding a collision with the police car. The sudden stop caused the Jeep to skid slightly off the road and scrape against a metal guardrail. The sound of the impact echoed, but the vehicle remained intact. "Perfect," Mike said, stepping out of the patrol car. Jack followed, grinning as he adjusted his police belt, acting as though they had just completed a critical mission. The man in the Jeep got out. It was Marcus Johnson. He stood tall, his eyes calm but unyielding. His posture caught the two officers off guard for a moment, but they quickly masked their surprise with smug expressions. "Looks like it's going to be an eventful night," Mike said with a sneer. "So, what are you doing out here, buddy? Look at that car of yours, doesn't seem like you belong around here, does it?" Jack, leaning against the patrol car, added with a mocking laugh, "Or maybe you're here for the Best Car of the Year competition. If so, you're winning the Junkyard Jewel Award." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the two men, observing their every move. Anger simmered within him, but he knew he had to stay composed. This wasn't the first time he had faced men like them, and he knew it wasn't yet time to act. Mike stepped closer, his hand resting near his holster as if ready to draw his weapon. "You still haven't answered my question. What are you doing here, and what's in that car of yours?" "Pop the trunk for inspection." Jack leaned casually against the patrol car, smirking. "Bet this guy doesn't even have the proper paperwork. We might need to take him downtown." Marcus took a deep breath, holding his composure. He knew that letting anger take control would only make things worse. Looking Mike straight in the eye, he said in a calm, steady voice, "You have no right to do this. This is an abuse of power." Mike burst into laughter. "Abuse of power? Come on, buddy, we're just doing our job. If you don't like it, you can file a complaint." "Oh, wait, I bet that never works, does it?" Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, the humiliation cutting deep. But instead of retaliating, he allowed a small smile to play on his lips. "You'll find out who I am soon enough." The story had only just begun, and Mike and Jack had no idea that the man they had mocked would soon become their worst nightmare. "Are you going to tell us what you're doing here?" Mike continued, his tone sharp yet tinged with mockery. He stood a short distance from Marcus, his eyes scrutinizing every movement. Jack, still leaning against the patrol car, occasionally glanced at his partner before shifting his gaze back to Marcus, his face full of arrogance. Marcus stood his ground, unmoving. He was no stranger to situations like this in the past. Seeing the smug attitudes of these two young officers, he didn't need to guess they were trying to provoke him. But Marcus knew that if he reacted strongly or showed anger, he would fall right into the trap they were setting. "Look at that car, Jack," Mike said loudly, making sure Marcus could hear. "I don't think I've ever seen a worse-looking vehicle." It probably wouldn't even pass an emissions test. A car like this is a hazard on the road. Jack burst into laughter. Bet he uses it for scavenging old junk. Or wait, do you think he lives in it? Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing but his demeanor remaining calm. I don't think your comments have anything to do with law enforcement. Instead of standing here making jokes, you should be doing your job, he said, his voice steady and clear. Jack hesitated briefly at the response, but Mike, unwilling to be challenged, immediately stepped closer, nearly face to face with Marcus. Listen, buddy, I don't think you're in a position to tell us how to do our job. And if I'm not mistaken, you still haven't answered my question. What are you doing here? Or are you just refusing to let us inspect your car? Marcus met Mike's gaze directly, his eyes unwavering. You have no right to search my car without probable cause. This is an abuse of power. Marcus's words only added fuel to the fire. Mike laughed loudly, but his smile held no friendliness. Abuse of power? Do you think we need a reason to do our job? Hey, Jack, this guy must be new to how things work around here. Jack shrugged and moved toward Marcus's Jeep, pretending to inspect it. He kicked the tires, peered through the windows, and then turned to Marcus with a defiant smirk. You're not hiding anything illegal in here, are you? Hey, Mike, I think we should check the trunk just to be safe. Marcus sighed, his gaze sharpening while his tone remained composed. You stopped me without cause, and now you want to search my car without any justification. Do you think this is how law enforcement should work? Jack let out a loud laugh, turning to Mike. Did you hear that, Mike? The guy thinks he's in a law class. Mike shrugged, stepping closer to the Jeep and pointing at it. Listen here, buddy. This is our turf. We decide who belongs here and who doesn't, and clearly, this car. And you don't belong. Without waiting for any further protest, Jack opened the Jeep's door and began rifling through the back seat. Marcus's personal belongings, papers, a few notebooks, were carelessly lifted and tossed aside. A gym bag was pulled out, and Jack pretended to thoroughly search it as though expecting to find something illegal. Disappointing, Jack said with a mocking tone. I was hoping for at least a gun or maybe a bag of cash, but all we've got here is some old clothes and crumpled papers. Mike, still standing near Marcus, laughed loudly and looked him straight in the eye. You seem confident. I bet you think you're smarter than us. But let me remind you, you're here on our streets, and we make the rules. Marcus didn't move, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on Jack, who continued to toss his belongings around. He wanted to react, to put an end to this abuse of power. But he knew any action on his part would only be used against him. Jack laughed again as he pulled a folder from the back seat. Oh, what's this? Work files? Someone thinks they're important. But I doubt anyone driving a car like this holds any meaningful position. Mike chimed in, probably one of those people who likes to pretend they're professional. You know, someone with a rusty exterior trying to look polished on the inside. Jack dropped the folder on the ground and continued rummaging through the trunk, while Mike stared Marcus down. Hey, buddy, do you think this car deserves to be on the road? It doesn't even look safe enough for backcountry driving. Marcus, though holding back his emotions for far too long, remained calm. His voice was firm yet unwavering. You're overstepping. This is my personal property, and you have no right to continue searching it. Marcus's statement caused Jack to pause briefly, but instead of recognizing his mistake, Jack turned to Mike and shrugged. Looks like the guy doesn't want us touching his stuff. Maybe we should take him down to the station and see how he explains himself to the higher-ups. Marcus took a step forward, his tall stature suddenly making both officers feel the weight of his presence. I'm not going anywhere, and you should stop what you're doing. Your actions are not just an abuse of power, they're a blatant violation of my rights. If you don't have a legitimate cause, you'd better stop. Mike, though trying to maintain his smug expression, was unsettled by Marcus's confidence. But he wasn't ready to admit fault. All right, Jack, I think we've seen enough. Nothing's interesting here. Jack stepped back, throwing the folder into the trunk and slamming it shut. What a waste of time, he muttered in frustration. "I hope we don't see you around here again, buddy." As Mike and Jack returned to their patrol car, they continued to mock Marcus. "Good luck finding your way home, pal. Next time, don't expect to get off this easy." The patrol car rolled away, leaving Marcus standing by the side of the road, his Jeep rummaged through, his belongings disordered, and his dignity challenged. Yet, he didn't let anger take control. Marcus stood there for a moment, breathing deeply to regain his composure. In his mind, one thought was clearer than ever: this is why I have to go back to the force. This is exactly what needs to change. As the patrol car's lights faded into the distance, Marcus continued reorganizing his belongings. However, before Mike and Jack could drive too far, he raised his head and called out in a calm yet ominous tone, "Don't worry, gentlemen. By tomorrow morning, you'll know exactly who I am." Mike and Jack heard the remark, prompting them to pause briefly. Jack turned to Mike, raising an eyebrow. What did he just say? Sounded like a threat. Mike smirked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Just some arrogant guy. Probably thinks he's someone important. Jack shrugged, feigning indifference. Maybe he thinks he's a lawyer or something. Either way, I'm not worried. If he wants to file a complaint, we've got the connections to handle it. Mike nodded, starting the car and driving off. Exactly. People like him aren't worth our time. The city police department was unusually lively that day. News of the appointment of a new chief had spread quickly. Officers gathered in small groups, speculating about the incoming boss they had yet to meet. Some hoped for positive changes, while others worried about what the future might hold. Mike and Jack strolled into the station, still carrying their usual air of confidence. They were blissfully unaware of the significant event that was about to unfold. "I hear we're getting a new boss today," Jack said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Hope he's not the micromanaging type." Mike chuckled. "Whoever it is, it won't make a difference to us. We know how to do our jobs." Suddenly, the intercom buzzed to life. "All personnel, please assemble in the main hall in 10 minutes to welcome the new chief of police." Officers began making their way toward the hall. Mike and Jack followed leisurely, continuing their light-hearted banter. At precisely 9 a.m., all personnel gathered in the main hall. The room fell silent as officers filled the space, their curious eyes fixed on the stage where a microphone stood ready. The faint murmurs faded as the main doors swung open. Marcus stepped in, his posture upright, his gaze sharp, and his uniform immaculate, exuding the aura of a true leader. All eyes in the room immediately turned to Marcus. Some officers appeared impressed by his commanding presence, while others began to feel a creeping sense of unease as they recognized the authority emanating from the new chief. Mike and Jack, standing in a corner of the room, froze in disbelief when they saw Marcus. For a moment, they couldn't trust their eyes. Jack leaned toward Mike, whispering, "No way, that's him. The guy from last night." Mike swallowed hard, cold sweat trickling down his temple. "Damn it. We're in serious trouble now." Marcus ascended the podium, his eyes scanning the room, briefly pausing on the corner where Mike and Jack stood. Maintaining absolute composure, he began speaking with a voice that was clear and commanding, resonating throughout the hall. "Good morning. My name is Marcus Johnson, your new chief of police. It is an honor to stand here today, but I bring with me not just a title, but an important mission, one that I believe is not mine alone, but belongs to all of us." He paused briefly, letting his words settle in the air. The police force is not merely a symbol of authority. It is a symbol of trust, responsibility, and justice. But I'm not naive enough to think that these values have always been upheld. I know that certain behaviors have tarnished our image in the eyes of the public. Marcus's gaze swept across the room, his sharp eyes seemingly piercing through each individual. "Abuse of power, discrimination, and irresponsibility will not be tolerated under my leadership. I am committed to ensuring that every member of this force, from the highest rank to the lowest, will be held accountable for their actions. No exceptions." The room fell into a deafening silence. Everyone felt the weight of Marcus's words. Honest officers began to feel a glimmer of hope, while those with past misdeeds, like Mike and Jack, started to feel the pressure bearing down on them. Marcus continued, "I have heard about the misconduct within our ranks. I know some have forgotten that this badge is not a personal privilege but a responsibility to the community. Let me make it clear, anyone who disrespects this responsibility will face the consequences." Once again, Marcus's gaze landed on Mike and Jack. Though he didn't call them out by name, both men felt as though his words were aimed directly at them. "Starting today, there will be changes," Marcus announced. "I urge all of you to prepare yourselves because I am not here to maintain the status quo. I am here to improve it." Ending his speech, Marcus stepped down from the podium. He didn't look back at Mike and Jack, but both knew that he had them in mind. As the room began to empty, murmurs of speculation filled the air. Some officers felt a mix of excitement and apprehension about the changes Marcus had hinted at, while others worried about facing the repercussions of their past behavior. Mike and Jack lingered in a corner, both uncharacteristically silent. Jack was the first to break the quiet. "What do you think he's going to do to us?" Mike shook his head, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know. But one thing's for sure, we can't let him gain the upper hand." Mike and Jack left the meeting room in prolonged silence, Marcus's words still echoing in their minds. Each sentence cut deep into their once confident demeanor. They couldn't deny the tension now weighing heavily on them. From the very moment Marcus had stepped into the room, they had sensed something was off. But when he walked up to the podium and introduced himself as the new chief, the realization hit them like a lightning bolt. He was the man they had stopped and mocked the night before. All morning, Mike and Jack tried to avoid crossing paths with Marcus. Yet, every step they took in the station felt as though his eyes were following them. Even though Marcus hadn't said a word since the meeting, his presence alone, the calm intensity of his gaze and the way he observed everything around him, made the atmosphere in the station palpably tense. During lunch, as they sat in the corner of the break room, trying to keep their nerves in check, the door suddenly opened. Marcus walked in, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the crowded room. Though he didn't directly look at Mike and Jack, both of them felt an invisible weight pressing down on them. Jack whispered, "He's looking for us." "I'm sure of it." "Stay calm," Mike replied, trying to mask his unease. But his hands gripped the edge of his chair tightly. "He can't do anything right now. We just have to wait and see what he does next." As Marcus left the room, Jack turned to Mike. "Did you notice? He doesn't even need to say anything. Just that look alone is enough to tell us what he wants." Mike nodded grimly. "Exactly. And that's what's terrifying. He knows we're scared, and he wants us to feel it." The rest of the day, Mike and Jack could hardly focus on their duties. They constantly felt as if Marcus was watching their every move. Their colleagues didn't seem to notice their discomfort, but for Mike and Jack, every passing hour felt like mental torture. "We need to talk to him," Jack said as they left the station at the end of the day. "Apologize or beg for forgiveness, something. We can't let this drag on." Mike shook his head. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. We need time to think, to figure out what he's planning before we make a move." Jack sighed, clearly dissatisfied with the response. "Time isn't on our side, Mike. He could act at any moment, and I don't want to wait for that to happen." Mike and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before Marcus acted. But they hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Just hours after lunch, a message appeared on both their phones: "Robertson Miller, report to the chief's office immediately." Jack stared at his screen, his heart pounding. This is going to end badly. Mike tried to keep his composure, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. "We don't have a choice. Let's go." It's best to face him and hope he just wants to issue a warning. The heavy click of the office door closing behind them felt like a death knell. The air in the room seemed stifling. Marcus sat behind his desk, his cold gaze tracking their every movement. "Sit down," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make both men feel the pressure bearing down on them. Mike and Jack sat down, neither daring to speak first. Marcus slowly pulled a file from his desk drawer, placed it on the desk, and opened it. Inside were reports, photographs, and most notably, footage from the patrol car's dashboard camera the night before. First, Marcus began, his eyes drilling into theirs. "I want to hear from you. Explain to me what you were doing on patrol last night." "You said." Mike and Jack exchanged glances, clearly searching for a way to justify their actions. But under Marcus's stern gaze, every lie seemed to get stuck in their throats. Mike finally spoke, attempting to keep his voice steady. "Sir, we were just doing our job. We noticed a suspicious vehicle in the area and wanted to ensure everything was safe." "Safe?" Marcus repeated, emphasizing the word. "Stopping a car without cause, forcing the driver off the road, and searching personal property without any grounds, is that how you define safe?" Jack, his voice tinged with pleading, tried to intervene. "Chief, we didn't mean any harm. We just thought the vehicle didn't belong in the area. We wanted to make sure everything was okay." Marcus leaned forward, his tone colder than ever. "You thought your authority gave you the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't? You thought this badge was a tool to enforce your personal biases?" He slid a printed image from the file across the desk toward them. It was a still from the patrol car footage, clearly showing Mike and Jack forcing Marcus's Jeep to the side of the road, followed by their actions of rummaging through his belongings. "You don't need to explain further," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "I've seen the video, I've read the witness reports, and I've experienced firsthand how you treated me, not as your chief, but as an ordinary citizen." Marcus stood, his gaze stern and unforgiving. "What you did wasn't just irresponsible, it was an abuse of power. It was a violation of privacy and a threat to the safety of a citizen." Jack hung his head, unable to say a word. Mike, still trying to justify their actions, spoke with a voice that had started to falter. "Chief, we honestly didn't know. We didn't know it was you." Marcus let out a faint, humorless laugh, his eyes sharp as knives. "And if I wasn't your new chief, what then? Would you have mocked me more? Pressed me further? Or did you think no one would ever hold you accountable?" Marcus turned to his seat, facing them squarely. "Let me remind you, this badge does not grant you the freedom to act as you please. It is a symbol of responsibility, a responsibility to the citizens you swore to protect, not to oppress." As silence engulfed the office, Marcus looked deeply into the anxious eyes of Mike and Jack. Instead of continuing his interrogation, Marcus leaned back in his chair and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Do you know why I took this job? Let me tell you a story." He paused, then continued, his voice steady. "Many years ago, I was an idealistic young police officer. I joined the force not just for the stability of a job, but because I believed I could make a difference. To me, the police badge wasn't just a symbol of authority, it was a reminder of my responsibility to the community. I worked tirelessly to protect the vulnerable and to fight against injustice. During the early years of my career, I tried my best to live up to the values I believed in. I once saved a family from a fire, stood up for an immigrant being discriminated against, and helped an orphaned boy reunite with his family. These moments made me proud of my profession. But then I began to realize that not everyone in the force shared those ideals. The whispers behind my back, the disdainful looks aimed at those who were different, and decisions tainted by prejudice began to reveal the darker side of the organization I served." Marcus's tone grew heavier as he continued. "The turning point in my journey came when my sister, Lisa, joined the police force. Lisa was intelligent and strong and shared my ideals. However, she wasn't treated with the respect she deserved. As a woman of color in law enforcement, she became the target of ridicule and discrimination from the very colleagues she trusted. I remember one evening vividly. Lisa came home after her shift, her eyes red with anger and frustration. She told me about being deliberately excluded from important assignments, mocked for being told women don't belong in this field, and even falsely accused of mistakes she hadn't made. I fought for my sister. I reported these incidents to our superiors, but everything was swept under the rug. We don't want to disrupt the team was the only response I received. In the end, Lisa couldn't bear the pressure and left the force, carrying with her the pain and injustice she endured. Watching my inability to protect my sister crushed me. I realized that the ideals I had once believed in had been corrupted by people who abused their power for personal gain. Marcus stood, his expression unwavering. After a long struggle with myself, I decided to leave the force. I moved to the suburbs to live a quiet life with my family, trying to forget the injustices I had witnessed. But the peace didn't last. He paused, his voice softening for a moment. One day, I heard about an incident in the city. A young man was stopped by the police and shot simply because he didn't exit his vehicle quickly enough. Reading about it, I realized that the abuses of power I had witnessed hadn't just continued, they had grown worse. A conversation with Lisa changed everything. "You always said we have to fight for justice," she said. "But if we give up, who will do it?" Her words struck a chord in me. I realized that if I wanted change, I couldn't stay away. I had to return, not as an ordinary officer, but as someone who could change the system from within. Marcus's eyes burned with determination as he concluded. When the city offered me the position of chief of police, I knew it was my chance to fulfill the mission I had carried in my heart for so long. Mike and Jack sat in stunned silence. They began to realize that the man standing before them wasn't just their police chief, he was someone carrying a powerful story and a profound mission. "You think what you did last night doesn't matter," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "But I'm here to remind you that every action has consequences, and I will make sure those consequences happen." He set the file down on the desk, closing it with a decisive click. "You've lost not only my trust but the trust of this community. I cannot and will not tolerate that." Mike and Jack were speechless. They understood that every avenue for excuses had been shut. Marcus knew everything, and he had no intention of forgiving them. "Effective immediately, I am suspending both of you from duty," Marcus declared firmly. "You will surrender your badges and weapons and await further notice. I will also forward this report to the Oversight Committee to ensure your actions are thoroughly investigated." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus raised his hand to silence him. "I don't want to hear any excuses. Your actions have spoken louder than any words. Leave my office. Now." Mike and Jack left Marcus's office, their confidence shattered. They walked back to their desks in silence, exchanging looks of helplessness. They both knew their worst days were yet to come. Less than 24 hours later, Marcus called an emergency internal meeting. All personnel were required to attend, including Mike and Jack. The atmosphere at the police station was tense as everyone gathered, wondering what was about to unfold. Marcus entered the room, his presence commanding, his gaze unwavering. He wasted no time getting to the point. "Good morning. I made it very clear during my first meeting that I would not tolerate any actions that damage the integrity of this police force. Today, I must make a decision that I hope will serve as a lesson for all of us." He turned toward Mike and Jack, who were seated at the back of the room, their faces visibly uneasy. Mike Roberts and Jack Miller stepped forward. All eyes in the room turned to them. Mike and Jack stood, walking slowly to the front as if each step carried the weight of their impending fate. The room was so quiet that their heavy breaths could be heard. As they stood before Marcus, he looked directly at them, his voice clear and resolute. "Last night, after reviewing evidence from the patrol car cameras and witness statements, I made my decision." Marcus paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "Your actions not only violated departmental policy but also shattered the community's trust in this force. I cannot and will not tolerate that." He pulled out 2 documents from his pocket and placed them on the table. "You are both hereby terminated, effective immediately. Your badges, weapons, and all privileges are revoked. Furthermore, I will ensure that your misconduct is recorded in your files, making you ineligible to work in any law enforcement agency again." The room fell into stunned silence. Mike and Jack were frozen in disbelief. Jack tried to protest, his voice trembling. "Chief, we didn't mean to." Marcus raised a hand, cutting him off. "There is no justification for your actions. This isn't just a personal mistake, it's a betrayal of the responsibilities you were entrusted with. You made this community feel fear instead of protection." Taking a deep breath, Marcus's tone grew heavier but remained firm. "I once believed in this badge. I saw its meaning, a symbol of justice and trust. But your behavior has tarnished everything this badge represents, and I cannot forgive that. His gaze locked onto theirs, emphasizing every word. Your actions were not just irresponsible, they were a betrayal to the community, to your colleagues, and to the very ideals of this profession. Mike bowed his head, his hands trembling. Jack stood motionless, his face pale. Both knew there was nothing more to say. Marcus's final words marked the end of their careers. As Mike and Jack left the meeting room, the silence lingered. Their colleagues, though shocked, said nothing. Some nodded in agreement with Marcus's decision, while others took it as a stark warning that misconduct would no longer go unpunished. Marcus turned to address the room. I did not do this to assert power. I did this out of responsibility to the community and to this force. We must do better. We must be people the public can trust. And if anyone here is unwilling to meet that standard, they have no place on this team. His words were met with silent acknowledgement. Some officers began reflecting on their actions, while others felt a renewed hope that meaningful change had finally begun. Mike and Jack left the police station with heavy hearts, Marcus's final words still echoing in their minds like an inescapable sentence. As they walked down the corridor, they felt the eyes of their colleagues on them, not with pity, but with disdain and even a hint of satisfaction. News of Mike and Jack's dismissal quickly spread beyond the station, becoming a hot topic in local media. Within hours, headlines like "2 officers fired for abuse of power and new police chief enforces justice, a lesson for the force" appeared everywhere, accompanied by photos of Mike and Jack in uniform. Public opinion was far from kind. Social media posts, comments under news articles, and even casual discussions at coffee shops zeroed in on the pair's failure. Mike and Jack quickly became symbols of corruption and abuse of power within law enforcement. Mike, once proud of his position in the police force, now faced the harsh reality that no agency wanted to hire him. Each time he applied for a job, his name was tainted by infamy. Companies rejected his applications outright, and the few interviews he managed to secure ended awkwardly in silence. Jack fared even worse. Not only had he lost his job, but he also lost his self-confidence. The public criticism and ridicule left him depressed. In the months that followed, he rarely left his small apartment, living in shame and bitterness. This wasn't supposed to happen, Jack said during one of his rare conversations with Mike. We were just doing what everyone else does. Why did it all fall on us? Mike sighed, saying nothing. He knew that making excuses would only make things worse. Deep down, he realized Marcus had been right, their actions were indefensible, and the consequences were unavoidable. Meanwhile, at the police station, Marcus began implementing the changes he had promised. He organized regular ethics training sessions, emphasizing the importance of respecting citizens and enforcing the law with transparency. These discussions delved into not just the legalities of policing, but also how to treat communities, especially marginalized groups often overlooked or mistreated. We're not just law enforcers, Marcus said during one training session. We are protectors. We are responsible for every action we take. And if we fail to uphold that responsibility, we do not deserve this badge. Marcus's leadership sparked a wave of transformation. Initially, some officers were nervous, fearing that their past mistakes might come to light. But over time, honest and dedicated officers began to feel hopeful. They realized Marcus wasn't there for a witch hunt but to rebuild trust within the force. The story of Mike and Jack became a lesson. Not just for the police department but also for the community. Other officers recognized that abuse of power would no longer be ignored or tolerated. Some changed their ways, becoming more mindful of their actions. The community, though still skeptical, started noticing small but meaningful changes in how the police approached and addressed issues. One resident who had been harassed by Mike and Jack spoke out, "I didn't think this would happen, but now I have hope that the police here can truly change." Over time, Mike and Jack faded from the public eye. However, the stains on their reputations never disappeared. Each time they sought new opportunities, their names resurfaced in old articles, reminding them of their past mistakes. Mike tried to rebuild his life through small, menial jobs, but each day he grappled with the bitterness of what he had lost. Jack, unable to cope with reality, withdrew into isolation, cutting himself off from the world. Marcus, on the other hand, didn't stop. He continued building a police force that prioritized the community, aiming not just to enforce the law but also to restore trust. He believed that every small change contributed to creating a better environment. Mike and Jack weren't the only ones to make mistakes, Marcus said in a meeting. But they are the clearest example of why we cannot keep repeating them. As the police department settled into its new normal following Marcus's sweeping changes, he refused to let himself rest. He knew that firing Mike and Jack was only the first step in a long journey toward reform. Marcus understood that addressing individual misconduct without tackling systemic issues would lead to only temporary progress. Marcus began hosting regular meetings with higher-ups and community representatives. He listened to feedback from all sides, not just from within the force, but also from those who had suffered under abusive policing. These candid discussions gave Marcus valuable insights into what needed to change and how to implement those changes. A strong police force does not make people afraid, Marcus said during one meeting. It makes people feel safe. He focused on creating new policies to ensure transparency in police operations. Patrol procedures were revised, with strict oversight through mandatory reports and camera recordings. Marcus also championed the establishment of an independent community oversight committee to ensure that misconduct would be addressed openly and fairly. One of Marcus's most significant reforms was introducing a mandatory training program for all recruits. This program emphasized not just the enforcement of laws but also respect for human rights, humane conflict resolution, and the elimination of personal biases. Marcus often worked longer hours than anyone else, spending countless evenings reviewing reports, meeting with community members, and even participating directly in training sessions. One officer once asked him, "Chief, why don't you take a break? You've already done so much." Marcus simply smiled. "I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing it for the people who need us. If we don't change, who will?" Gradually, Marcus's efforts began to bear fruit. Reports of misconduct dropped significantly. Relationships between the police and the community improved. Even those who had doubted the police force started to feel a renewed sense of hope. A woman who had once been a victim of police discrimination spoke at a community meeting. "I never thought I'd trust the police again, but thanks to Marcus, I've seen changes. I believe we're heading in the right direction." In a local TV interview, Marcus was asked about his determination to reform the police force. "Change starts with leadership," Marcus said, his voice resolute. "We can't expect a system to fix itself if those at the top aren't willing to confront the toughest issues. I'm not perfect, and I don't expect everyone to change overnight. But I believe that if we take small steps and stay committed to our community, we can create a better future." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "The police force isn't a symbol of power. It must be a symbol of trust. And if we can't achieve that, then we don't deserve the badges we wear." As the interview ended, Marcus stepped out of the studio. Outside, the sunlight bathed the city. He knew the journey ahead was still long, but the first steps had been taken. Most importantly, he wasn't alone. He had honest colleagues, a supportive community, and an unwavering belief that change was possible. Despite the progress, Marcus remained vigilant. He understood that the culture of a department couldn't be changed overnight. While he had earned the respect of many, he was also aware of lingering resentment from those resistant to reform. One evening, during a quiet patrol ride along with a junior officer, Marcus reflected on the challenges ahead. "The hardest part about change isn't getting started," he said. "It's staying the course when things get tough. But we owe it to the community to keep going." The junior officer, inspired by Marcus's leadership, nodded. "You've given us hope, Chief. I've never seen this much respect for the police before." In the following months, Marcus continued to address systemic issues. He introduced a mentorship program, pairing seasoned officers with new recruits to instill values of integrity and empathy. He also worked with local organizations to create community outreach programs, aiming to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they served. One of the programs, called Community Voices, invited residents to share their experiences with law enforcement directly with officers. These sessions, while sometimes uncomfortable, fostered understanding and empathy. Officers who had previously distanced themselves from the community began to see the people they served in a new light. "I used to think my job was just to catch criminals," one officer admitted during a session. "But now I see it's also about protecting the dignity of everyone in our community." For Marcus, these small victories were a sign of progress. Yet, he never allowed himself to become complacent. He knew that reform was a continuous process and that vigilance was key to sustaining the trust they were rebuilding. Meanwhile, Mike and Jack's lives took divergent paths. Mike, though bitter about his dismissal, began to reflect on his actions. With time, he sought therapy and eventually found work as a security guard. While the job was far from his aspirations, it gave him a chance to rebuild his life. He started volunteering at a local youth center, hoping to make amends for his past behavior. Jack, however, struggled to move forward. Consumed by anger and shame, he isolated himself further. His once vibrant personality faded, and he became a shadow of his former self. Friends and family tried to reach out, but Jack refused their help, unwilling to confront the consequences of his actions. As the years passed, the impact of Marcus's leadership became evident. The police force gained recognition for its transparency and commitment to fairness. Citizens who had once feared officers began to approach them with trust and confidence. Marcus had not only reformed the department but had also redefined what it meant to serve and protect. During a community awards ceremony honoring his contributions, Marcus addressed the audience with humility. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us officers, community members, and leaders, coming together to create something better. The badge I wear is a symbol of that partnership, and I will continue to honor it every day." As Marcus looked out at the crowd, he saw faces filled with hope. It was a reminder that even in the face of resistance and challenges, the fight for justice was worth every effort. The journey wasn't over, but Marcus was ready to continue leading with integrity and purpose, knowing that real change starts with those brave enough to take the first step. Years after Marcus began his transformative journey, the ripple effects of his leadership could be felt throughout the city. Crime rates had decreased, not because of harsher policing but because of a stronger sense of collaboration between law enforcement and the community. Residents who once feared the badge now saw it as a beacon of protection and fairness. The department's image shifted from one of mistrust to one of respect. Despite his success, Marcus remained grounded. He frequently walked through neighborhoods, speaking with residents, and ensuring they felt heard. His approachable demeanor earned him admiration, especially from the youth who saw him as more than a police chief, a mentor and a symbol of hope. One young boy, Malik, approached Marcus during a community event. "Chief Johnson," he said shyly, "do you think someone like me could be a police officer one day?" Marcus knelt to meet Malik at eye level. "Of course, you can," he said warmly. "Being an officer isn't about power, it's about responsibility. If you want to help people and stand up for what's right, there's nothing stopping you." Encounters like this fueled Marcus's passion for his work. He understood that lasting change wasn't just about reforming policies but about inspiring the next generation to uphold values of integrity and justice. At the department, Marcus continued to push for innovation. He introduced a community liaison unit, composed of officers specifically trained to mediate conflicts and address concerns without escalating tensions. These officers underwent extensive training in de-escalation techniques, cultural awareness, and mental health first aid. The unit became a cornerstone of the department's efforts to foster trust and understanding. One notable success involved a tense standoff at a local housing complex. Residents had been protesting unsafe living conditions and felt ignored by the city. When tensions began to rise, the liaison unit stepped in, not with force but with empathy. They listened to the residents' grievances, relayed their concerns to city officials, and worked to ensure the issues were addressed. The peaceful resolution was a testament to Marcus's belief that communication and respect were more powerful than intimidation. Not everyone embraced Marcus's changes. A small but vocal faction within the department resisted his leadership, clinging to outdated attitudes. These individuals saw Marcus's reforms as a threat to their autonomy and authority. Some even attempted to undermine him, spreading rumors and questioning his methods. Marcus was not deterred. He met resistance with patience and determination, taking the time to engage directly with his critics. "I understand change is difficult," he told one officer during a heated discussion. "But ask yourself, why did you put on this uniform in the first place? Was it to serve and protect, or something else?" Over time, some of his harshest critics began to soften. They saw the positive outcomes of his initiatives and realized the department was better off under his leadership. Those who refused to adapt eventually left the force, recognizing they no longer fit within the evolving culture. Marcus also focused on ensuring accountability at all levels. He strengthened internal review processes, ensuring that misconduct was swiftly and transparently addressed. Officers who upheld the department's values were publicly acknowledged and rewarded, creating a culture where integrity was celebrated rather than overlooked. One of Marcus's proudest moments came when the department received national recognition for its reforms. During a ceremony in Washington, D.C., he accepted an award on behalf of the department, emphasizing that the success was a collective effort. "This award isn't about me," Marcus said during his acceptance speech. "It's about the men and women who work tirelessly every day to make our city safer and fairer. It's about the community members who trusted us enough to give us a chance to do better. And it's about the belief that change is always possible, no matter how daunting it may seem." The recognition brought attention to Marcus's work, inspiring other cities to reach out for guidance. Marcus willingly shared his strategies, hoping that the lessons learned in his city could serve as a blueprint for others. Back home, Marcus's impact extended beyond his role as chief. He became a mentor to officers and civilians alike, often visiting schools and community centers to speak about the importance of courage, empathy, and perseverance. One evening, during a quiet dinner with his family, Marcus's wife, Angela, asked him, "Do you ever feel like you've done enough?" Marcus smiled thoughtfully. "I don't think I'll ever feel like I've done enough. But that's not a bad thing. It means I still have work to do, and I'm okay with that." Angela reached across the table and took his hand. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself too. The city needs you, but we need you too." Marcus nodded, reminded of the balance he needed to maintain between his responsibilities and his family. They had been his anchor through the challenges, providing the support he needed to keep going. As the years went by, Marcus began to prepare for the day he would step down as chief. He knew his time in the role was finite, but he wanted to ensure the changes he had implemented would outlast his tenure. He focused on grooming future leaders within the department, identifying those who shared his vision and values. One of his protégés, Officer Carmen Diaz, stood out. Her dedication, empathy, and unwavering commitment to justice reminded Marcus of his younger self. As his retirement approached, Marcus made it clear that Carmen was his recommendation for successor. At his retirement ceremony, Marcus addressed the crowd one last time. "When I started this journey, I didn't know how much we could accomplish. But standing here today, I'm proud of what we've built together. This department isn't perfect, and it never will be. But it's better, and that's what matters." He turned to Carmen, handing her the badge he had worn as chief. "This belongs to you now. Lead with courage, integrity, and humility. And never forget who you serve." The crowd erupted into applause as Marcus stepped down, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to shape the department for years to come. Though his time as chief had ended, Marcus's influence remained a testament to the power of perseverance, empathy, and the unwavering belief that one person can make a difference. After his retirement, Marcus dedicated his time to broader advocacy work, sharing the lessons he had learned during his time as chief. He became a sought-after speaker at conferences, community forums, and police academies, where he spoke passionately about the importance of ethical leadership, community trust, and accountability in law enforcement. "You don't have to wait for the system to change," Marcus often told his audiences. "Change starts with you, your decisions, your integrity, and your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." One of Marcus's most impactful initiatives was founding the Justice and Trust Institute, a nonprofit organization focused on bridging the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. The institute offered training programs for officers, workshops for community members, and resources for police departments seeking meaningful reform. Marcus believed that education and collaboration were the keys to building sustainable trust. Under his guidance, the institute developed a groundbreaking program called Walk in Their Shoes. This initiative paired officers with community members for immersive experiences where each party spent time understanding the other's daily challenges. Officers accompanied civilians to their jobs, homes, and neighborhoods, while community members shadowed officers during patrols. The program became a model for fostering empathy and breaking down stereotypes on both sides. One participant, Officer Sarah Klein, reflected on her experience during the program. "I thought I understood the people I was serving, but this showed me how much I didn't know." Walking alongside someone in their shoes changes your perspective completely. Marcus also became a mentor to police chiefs across the country. Many reached out to him for guidance, seeking advice on navigating the complexities of reforming their departments. Marcus always offered his insights willingly, emphasizing the importance of leading with both firmness and compassion. His efforts gained widespread recognition, and Marcus received numerous awards for his contributions to law enforcement and social justice. Despite the accolades, he remained humble, always redirecting the focus to the collective efforts of those who believed in change. Back in his city, the reforms Marcus had implemented continued to thrive under Chief Carmen Diaz's leadership. Carmen, inspired by Marcus's example, built upon his foundation, introducing new programs and strengthening the department's commitment to transparency and community engagement. She often sought Marcus's counsel, knowing that his wisdom and experience were invaluable. "Marcus," Carmen said during one of their meetings, "I hope I'm doing justice to the legacy you left behind." Marcus smiled warmly. "Carmen, you're not just upholding the legacy, you're creating your own. The work you're doing will inspire the next generation of leaders." Meanwhile, Marcus found joy in spending more time with his family. His wife, Angela, and their 2 children cherished the moments they shared, free from the demands of his former role. Yet, even in retirement, Marcus couldn't fully step away from his mission. He often volunteered at local schools and community centers, sharing his story with young people. He wanted them to understand that they had the power to shape their futures and the world around them. During one such visit, a high school student named Darius asked Marcus a poignant question. "How did you keep going, even when people doubted you?" Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I knew the work was bigger than me. It wasn't about proving people wrong, it was about doing what was right. And when you focus on that, the doubts don't matter as much." Darius nodded, inspired by Marcus's words. "I want to make a difference too." "You already are," Marcus said with a smile. "It starts with the choices you make every day." As the years passed, Marcus's influence grew beyond his city. His nonprofit expanded its reach, partnering with organizations nationwide to promote justice and equity. Marcus continued to travel, speak, and mentor, always striving to make a positive impact. Despite his national acclaim, Marcus never forgot the community where his journey had begun. He often returned to the neighborhoods he once patrolled, reconnecting with old friends and ensuring that the progress they had achieved continued to flourish. One evening, during a community celebration in his honor, Marcus stood before a crowd of familiar faces. Many of them had been skeptical of him when he first became chief, but now they looked at him with admiration and gratitude. "I didn't do this alone," Marcus said, his voice steady but emotional. "We did this together. Change isn't about one person, it's about a collective effort, a shared commitment to making things better. And that's what gives me hope for the future." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had been long and challenging, but it was worth every step. As the night wore on, Marcus sat quietly, reflecting on everything he had accomplished. He knew there was still much work to be done, but he felt confident that the seeds he had planted would continue to grow. His legacy wasn't just about the reforms he had implemented, it was about the lives he had touched, the minds he had changed, and the belief he had instilled in others that justice and trust were always worth fighting for.